أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We start by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, thanking Him for His immense bounties upon us, the blessing of health, the blessing of mind, the ability to gather here on this day, on this night, for His sake and His sake alone. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to shower His peace, blessings and mercy upon the final messenger, Muhammad ibn Abdullah, upon those that followed him till this day, inshallah Rabbil Alameen, his companions, his household, and those that follow him until the final day. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among those. Ameen. Dear brothers and sisters, Jazakumullahu khairan for being here on this night. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, the weather is not as cold as yesterday. But it still is a cold night, and it takes a considerable effort to come here. And I know this, you know this. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept and to reward us for every step that we make, for every turn of wheel that happens to the car or bus or whatever way that we come here. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept that, inshaAllah. The story of Al-Andalus is a beautiful story. And tonight is the third session of it. And what we'll do first, inshallah Rabbil Alameen, is that we will cover a review. And I named today's session the era of governors, and we'll see why. And the one denotes part one. We'll talk inshallah about the previous sessions. We'll give a quick review about it, and then we'll delve into today's session inshallah. Chapter 1 will be about the Caliph's orders. The Caliph's orders. Chapter 2 will be about the Muslim Al-Andalus. Now it's Muslim. What happens? How is it like? Chapter 3 will talk about jihad in France. Did jihad actually happen in France? Were there Muslim armies that went to France? Yes, there were. We'll talk about that inshallah. Chapter 4 will be the last chapter of today's session. It is about the fallback. And we'll see what does that fallback mean and what were the repercussions of it, inshallah. A quick review. So why talk about history to begin with? And this was a question that I posed in the first session, and I would like to hear from you, inshallah, regarding it. Why are we talking about history? Can anyone mention any reasons why talk about history?
Usually the history repeats itself.
Jazakallahu khairan. Jazakallahu khairan. History repeats itself. History repeats itself. And we actually said this phrase last time. And last time we even asked the question, what does history repeats itself mean? What does it mean? And we said that it means that the same mistakes will happen and the same successes will happen if conditions are the same. And conditions really vary, but sometimes people are put into the same condition, the same situation. And human nature is the same. Unless we learn from the past, we will fall into the same mistakes today. Unless we learn from the successes of the past, we won't be successful today. Jazakallahu khair. That's an excellent reason. Any other reason as to why we are studying history? Why reflect upon history? Why even talk about history? What's the big deal about history? Why not just think about the future? Yes? Whoever doesn't have a past doesn't have a future. Jazakallahu khairan. That's very deep, brother, mashallah. Any other reasons as to why cover and talk about history? Yes? To establish roots for ourselves. Jazakallahu khairan. Jazakallahu khairan. And the reason that we kind of touched upon briefly was from فَقْصُصِ الْقَصَصِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. The verse in the Quran that says, relate the story, narrate these stories, relate to them. Perchance that they may reflect. Perchance that they may reflect. And hence, the element here, and the focus is reflection. There's no point in talking about history if we do not reflect upon it. There's no reason to do it. We're not doing it to cry over spilt milk. We're doing it to touch upon history. The rules of success and failure are the same. The sunnah or the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this world are the same. If we adopt these rules, we will be successful and we will avoid failure. We will see the coward the brave. We will see all types of people, the just ruler, the corrupt ruler. We will see the mujahid who is sincere. We will see the bounty hunter, those that do things for money alone. All these types of people will be the types of people that we will reflect upon in this series, inshaAllah. We will also see the contribution of Islam to civilization, the often neglected and uncredited contribution of Islam to civilization. So this is a quick review. Shouldn't have showed you the slide actually. But anyway, I'll ask the question. You took a peek at the slide. How many soldiers were led by Tariq ibn Ziyad into Al-Andalus? Yes?
7,000.
7,000. Jazakallah khairan. How many were supported, or support that came with Musa ibn Nusayr? How many were they? Yes? 5,000. So they were 12,000 men at one point in time. They were facing an army of how many? Yes? 100,000. Jazakallah khairan. Jazakallah khairan. How many of those 12,000 were martyred in the first battle? In the first battle. Does anyone remember that number? Yes. 3,000. Jazakallah khairan. And it's a hefty price. It's a hefty price. 3,000 martyrs. 3,000 people passed away in the battle of Guadalit, also known as the battle of the valley of Barbat. In Arabic it's called Barbat. In English perhaps Barbate. This battle was a very expensive one. And the king of the Christian army at the time, his name was, does anyone remember? Yes? Roderick. He passed away in this battle. He was killed in this battle, it is said. This shows us a map that shows the different rivers in Al-Andalus. Here is where the battle took place. What did the Muslim army offer to the city that they were about to conquest? There were three things that they offered. These are the three things they offered. You either enter into Islam and become just like us. Whatever is upon us is upon all of us. And whatever is for us is for all of us. Or you pay something known as the jizya. And we leave you with everything that you own. Your property is protected and you pay something known as a jizya. Or you fight us. These were the options that were given. Can anyone tell me what is the jizya? This was something that Brother Sharif Awad reflected upon last time. Yes? It's like a tax. Jazakallah khairan. Can anyone allude to that or add to that?
Yeah, it's like tax. However, you remain with your own religion, your own culture, and you will have our protection on top.
Jazakallah khair. So you're guaranteed your rights of freedom of religion, freedom of culture, and you gain the protection of the army, which was a Muslim army. Jazakallah khair. Yes, brother. Anything else? It's tax to the non-believers only. Jazakallah khair. Does anyone remember how much it is? Is it 2.5% like the zakat? Or is it 15% like today? Or is it 20% like today? Or is it... How much? Yes. It was 1 dinar a year actually. Jazakallah khair. Close. Jazakallah khair. And who was it taken from? Was it taken from every non-Muslim? Yes. Jazakallah khair. I would add women as well. So women, children, and those that were sick were actually exempt from paying the tax. With discrimination against women. And so they were actually not required to fight in the army. And only men were, the people that usually, carried arms. And so they are the ones that were exempt from being in the army, and hence they paid that tax, yearly tax. Strong, able men. Jazakallah khair. Musa ibn Nusayr instructed Tariq ibn Ziyad not to go past Qurtuba. Not to go past Qurtuba. But he hurried, he was zealous, and it just took him, that zeal took him. And he went all the way to Toledo. And we'll see in the map where Qurtuba is, and we'll see where Toledo is. And you can see the distance between them. But here, there's zeal versus patience versus obedience that I would like to reflect upon a bit. So Tariq ibn Ziyad did something. He did his own ijtihad, he did his own thinking, his own decision making, and he kind of disobeyed a direct order. He disobeyed a direct order. And I ask you this question, who is right? Is it Musa or is it Tariq? Tariq? Jazakallah khair. So one opinion, Tariq. Who says Tariq was right? Only one hand? Two hands? Alright. Who says that Musa was right? Much more hands. Alright. Jazakallah khair. So what was Musa's point to begin with? I mean, why did he command Tariq to stop at Qurtuba? Was it jealousy, as some Orientalists would like to say? Or was it that he wanted to get the credit of opening Al-Andalus as well? Which was it? Yes? Jazakallahu khairan. So he did not want Tariq to make the same mistakes that Uqba ibn Nafi' made in West Africa. Uqba ibn Nafi' was a very zealous Sahabi himself. And he wanted Islam to spread all over the world. He reached the Atlantic Ocean, and he said to the Atlantic Ocean, that if I knew that there was a land beyond you, I would have crossed you. I would have crossed you to reach that land. But Uqba ibn Nafi' was mistaken. For he did not allow Islam to reach the hearts of people, and to establish itself, and to settle. And so, the people of West Africa rebelled against him many times. And this was something that Musa ibn Nusayr feared. And hence he told Tariq, stop. Stop. Take it easy, bro. Don't let your zeal take you. Be patient. And so, Tariq Suwaidan comments on this, and he says that it would have been better. He says Tariq ibn Ziyad, of course, he doesn't blame him. He says Tariq ibn Ziyad was the commander in the battlefield, in the army, in the situation, knows the field, knows the ground, understands the situation, knows that perhaps if he did not go to Toledo, he would not have gotten that chance to go. Fear was, had struck into the hearts of the disbelieving army. And so he wanted to make use of that. He wanted to capitalize on that. And he went all the way to Toledo. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward him for making that effort and for that decision. However, Tariq so then says it would have been better if he consulted Musa ibn Nusayr. It would have been better if he had consulted Musa ibn Nusayr. And hence comes the role of obedience in our work. In our work. He hurried, and the fear of Musa ibn Nusayr actually materialized. When the army went all the way to Toledo, and you'll see in the map where Toledo is, in Arabic it's known as Tulaytila, where it is, you'll see how far it is from Ishbilia, also known as Sevilla. And so the people of Sevilla rebelled. Now is that statement correct? The people of Ishbilia or Ishbilia rebelled? Is that a correct statement? Yes, no, no, yes? Yes? Any other ventures? Yes? Yes? No? Unsure? Unsure. Alright. So the answer is no. It's an incorrect statement because the people did not rebel. The nobles did. The nobles did. And so the nobles of Ishbilia had surrendered to Tariq and said, we'll pay the jizya. You be the ruler, we own our property, and we'll pay you this 1 dinar every year, if you like. But then when they saw that the army went so far away and they found that the number of Muslims that were around in Ishbilia was such a small number, they said, you know what? We should rule the land. We can increase our wealth 10 times more if we become the rulers. And so they rebelled. Not the people, the nobles, the people that were rulers before. And so Ishbilia fell and was no longer under Muslim rule. The fear of Musa ibn Nusayr materialized. Is it true that Tariq ibn Ziyad burned his ships? Yes? No? No? No, Jazakumullah khair. Orientalists did this. They planted this story in history. And they did this for several reasons, because they did not comprehend that an army of 100,000 would lose in face of 12,000. How could this happen? It's impossible. And it's not just that, it's also on our turf. It's not on Muslim land in the desert. It's on our turf. We know the valleys, the rivers, the different cities. We know this. How on earth could this happen? How in history could this happen? They could not fathom it. They did not understand it. They could not comprehend it. And so they had to come up with these stories. One of them was that Tariq ibn Ziyad burnt his ships. And so when he burnt the ships, he actually forced his people to fight. He told them, the ships are burned. Now you have to fight. The army's coming. You have to defend yourself or else you'll die. Another thing that they said was the reason for the fall of Al-Andalus was the treachery of Julian. Does anyone remember Julian of Septim? Julian of Septim? Who is he? Yes. Jazakallah khairan. So Julian of Septim, and Septim is a city, a port city in Al-Maghrib actually, in Morocco. And it looks at the Strait of Jabal Tariq. The Strait of Jabal Tariq is right there between Septim and Al-Andalus. So the Muslims actually needed that port so that they can pass to Al-Andalus. Their ships could sail to Al-Andalus. And he gave them that port. Does anyone remember what did he ask in return? What did he ask the Muslims in return? What did he ask Musa ibn Nusayr in return to giving that port? Yes. Land in Andalus. So he was aiding and supporting the sons of the previous king in Al-Andalus. And he said, I want their land. I want me and these heirs of the throne, the original heirs of the throne, want the land of the previous king, the land that he has, that he owned, the thousands of acres of land that he owned. Just give that to us. And Musa ibn Nusayr gave it wholeheartedly, proving to history and to us, it's not about land. It's not about conquesting land and owning these lands. It's about bringing Islam to the hearts of people. You want land? Take land. But we will rule, and we will rule justly, and we will enforce justice in this land. And we will bring Islam to the hearts of people. So he gave up the land for Julian to get that port from Julian. They also made up different stories. Sure, sure.
زياد لماذا قال لهم البحر من ورائكم والعدو أمامكم وليس لكم والله إلا الصفح والصبر واعلموا أنكم في هذه الجزيرة أضيع من الأيتام في مأدبة اللئام.
جزاك الله خير.
Shows that he had no boats.
جزاك الله خير.
His speech.
جزاك الله خير. So the question is, why did Tariq ibn Ziyad say that the sea is behind you and in front of you is the enemy, and you are like orphans in this land? And I would even continue with the speech, as it's narrated to us by Orientalists, that the land in front of you is full of beautiful women. Full of beautiful women. And you will go in and you will take everything. All the riches and all the women are yours. The Khalifa does not want anything from you. That's what the narration says. And dear brothers and sisters, it is an outright lie. And it is proposed and propagated by Orientalists that this is what Tariq ibn Ziyad said. He did not say perhaps a fraction of this. And scholars of history, they bring you different proofs that Tariq did not say this. This is not the vocabulary of Tariq, that he did not say this speech at all. Perhaps only a small portion of it is true. And so Tariq ibn Ziyad and his army were an army of believers. And the years that come will prove this. Will prove this. So many stories were made to kind of, reduce in the value of this victory. This is the difference, dear brothers and sisters, between Rodrique's army and Tariq's army. And this was highlighted by Brother Sharif last time. Huge difference. And Tariq, so then he highlights this and he reflects upon it. He says, it's like a team of Al-Jannah, Fariq Al-Jannah, the team of Al-Jannah. And another team that only cares about money and wealth and the, Fariq Al-Dunya, the things that are lesser in this world, that are not of value. They had this unity among them that was so unique. There were Berbers and Arabs, and yet they were united for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Musa prepared an army of 18,000 men. He brought them and went to Al-Andalus to aid Tariq ibn Ziyad, to help him, to support him, to complement him. And Tariq actually stopped at Toledo. So Tariq obeyed the order just a bit late. He stopped at Toledo. This large army, 18,000, came from all over. There were now not just Arabs They were from all over the Muslim world at the time. Why did they come? They came because they saw an opening. They saw success. They saw that Al-Andalus is being opened. The dream of Uthman ibn Affan will materialize. Does anyone remember the dream of Uthman ibn Affan? Uthman ibn Affan dreamed of a certain city. Does anyone remember that city? Constantinople, Jazakallahu khairan. Constantinople. Uthman ibn Affan dreamed of Constantinople. And his army was unsuccessful in opening it. And so he said, the only way Constantinople or Constantinople will be opened would be through the sea. And whoever opens the land and crosses the sea will gain the reward of whoever opens Constantinople. Constantinople was opened many years later. By? Does anyone know? Muhammad al-Fatih. Jazakallahu khairan. Jazakallahu khairan. 1452, Muhammad al-Fatih opened Constantinople. And the reward of Muhammad al-Fatih is shared by Tariq ibn Ziyad and Musa ibn Nusayr. So they come from all over, but they're not pioneers. These 18,000 troopers are not the pioneers of this battle. They're not the pioneers of this fath, of this conquest, of this opening. The pioneers are those that went first, and faced the army for the first time, and entered foreign lands for the first time. A question that we need to ask ourselves, are you a pioneer? Are you a pioneer? Are you someone that follows into the footsteps of others when you see success? Or are you someone that takes initiative? Are you a doer? That's a question that we need to ask ourselves, inshallah. And the reward of doers is multiplied a zillion times than those that follow in the footsteps. They're also rewarded, but they don't get the reward of the pioneer. In history, in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, we have other pioneers. We have the people that became Muslim after the opening of Mecca. They saw Mecca open to Islam. They saw Islam embraced by so many people. And then they embraced Islam. In fact, one Sahabi came, and I don't remember his name, but he came and he was crying after the Fath of Mecca, after the opening of Mecca. And the Prophet told him, why are you crying? Don't cry. When you become a Muslim, all your sins are forgiven. You're a clean slate. And he said, I'm not crying because of this. I'm crying because many, many years ago, 20 years ago, I saw you in Mecca praying while the Muslims were being persecuted. And I asked about you. And someone who was actually a relative of the Prophet ﷺ, his uncle, Al-Abbas, was not a believer then. He told me, I can take you to Muhammad to introduce you to him if you're interested. But then I told Al-Abbas, let's leave it for now, let's focus on our trade. And so many years later, 20 years later, he came to the Prophet crying. He said that I had that opportunity 20 years before to become a believer, and I lost it. I lost it. I didn't hold to it. He did not become a pioneer. Musa's army complemented Tariq's army. And Orientalists here, of course, they want to, plant these seeds of doubt and say that Musa was jealous and Tariq ibn Ziyad was going to open Al-Andalus on his own, and Musa came, wanted to gain credit, and so that's why he stopped Tariq, etc., etc. But Musa actually laid siege to two major cities. One of them is Sevilla, Ashbilia, and the other is Narada, which Brother Sharif talked about last time, and we'll show you in a map where these two cities are. The map. This is an interesting map. We'll zoom in a bit. Another zoom in. And another zoom in. And so, I'll show you some yellow dots, inshallah, which are the cities that were opened by Tariq ibn Ziyad. This city was opened. This was the first battle, Barbat. Don't know if you see the name there. The second was this city right there, Chadiz, or Chadiv in Arabic. Sevilla, which is Ashbilia, was opened. Beside it, Qarmoon was opened. And then Qurtuba was open. And then Malaga in the sea was open. And then Gharnata was opened. And then you had Murcia was open. These cities were opened by Tariq ibn Ziyad. And then he went to Toledo. See Toledo right there in the top? See how far it is? Let's see that. That's the route that Tariq ibn Ziyad's army took. And he sent forces from his army. Remember, his army was a small army. It was, what? How many? How many? Yes. No, 3,000 were those that were martyred in the first battle. No, 9,000. Good math. 9,000 was the army that he had. And he sent some of them to different places. Let's try that again. Actually, I'll show you this image without the animation, because I want you to actually see it, inshallah. So, it's a beautiful image. Oh, where is it? There it is. And you can see here, this is the image, the map. And it's such a beautiful map. And here you see the different places going. You know, these are different armies. Small armies went. And they opened these places. This is the route of Musa ibn Nusayr. He came this way, and Ishbiliya, Sevilla had fallen, so he opened it again. He laid siege for months here. And then he opened this city right here, Marda. And then he sent his son, Abdul Aziz, to Lisbon, to Portugal. And you can see this is the border between Spain and Portugal today. This is Portugal. So Islam came and entered Portugal as well. Al-Andalus actually included Portugal. And he continued to Toledo, where he met with Tariq ibn Ziyad. And so, let's go to the next slide and then do this. They met at year 94 Hijri. 94 Hijri. Does anyone remember the year that Tariq ibn Ziyad first entered Al-Andalus? What year was that?
711 AD.
Jazakallah khair, 711 AD. How much in Hijri? No one remembers? Hijri?
90.
Close?
92.
92, Jazakallah khair. 92 Hijri was when Tariq ibn Ziyad first entered Al-Andalus. It took Tariq ibn Ziyad a year to reach Toledo. And it took Musa ibn Nusayr another year, because he took off in the year 93, another year to reach Toledo as well. A year, 2 years to kind of establish Islam. That's a long time. So here is Toledo. And here is Madrid. They went from there, from Toledo, they took off together. And they opened Zaragoza. And they opened this city right there. Lleida. Barcelona. All of these cities, Lyon. And then you see that other city right there? Way in the top? Do you see that white line? That's mountains. They crossed that mountain into Andorra, which was in France. The rule of law was that of justice. There were no more classes. Eradicated. There's no difference between a nobleman, a priest, or a peasant, a landowner, a landlord, or a worker, a goldsmith, or a blacksmith. There was no difference between any of them. They eradicated that. No more discrimination. No more. Al-Ghazali is reported to have said a very beautiful saying. He says, religious tolerance was brought forth to humanity by Islam. None heard of it before. 95 Hijri, the Muslims opened all of Andalus. It was the first of Shawwal. It was Eid. This is how they celebrated Eid. They opened Al-Andalus. Two celebrations versus today's celebrations. Today, we celebrate when a soccer team wins a match. We're so happy. Sometimes we are really proud of the Barcelona team or the Real Madrid team or all these European soccer leagues teams that we watch on TV. And we hear about, Aljazair and Egypt. And we're so happy that Egypt won, or we're so happy that Aljazair won. We're so happy that Aljazair now is in the World Cup series. These are the things that we celebrate today, unfortunately. And it perhaps is a bit, conspiratorial to say that this is by design. But I really do believe that it is by design. If the Muslims, if the youth, if the might and power of the Muslim Ummah are busy celebrating soccer wins and lamenting soccer losses. That's what will keep their mind occupied. They won't be able to think of any of this. But the Muslims at the time, this is what they were celebrating. They were celebrating the spread of Islam into the hearts of people. Musa was determined to open all of Al-Andalus, all of it. He laid siege to a city known as Pelona. And Pelona was after or behind a mountain or a rock, known as the Rock of Pelona. In Arabic, Pile. And so that rock, that city, was fortified and they couldn't reach it. He laid siege for it for months and months. And then something unexpected happened. He got a letter, a message from Al-Walid ibn Abd al-Malik. Al-Walid ibn Abd al-Malik. Who is Walid ibn Abd al-Malik? Does anyone know? The Khalifa of the Mu'mineen. Jazakallah khair. I should actually stop the brother, inshallah, because he knows all the answers, inshallah. Jazakallah khairan. And give the opportunity for the youth, inshallah, to contribute with what little they may know, inshallah. I mean, to help us all, inshallah, in learning. Al-Walid ibn Abd al-Malik was the Khalifa of the believers at the time. And so Al-Walid sent a letter to Musa ibn Nusayr telling him not only to stop, but to come, to return to Damascus. Not only Musa ibn Nusayr alone, but Tariq ibn Ziyad as well. So the two leaders were ordered by the Khalifa to come to the city, the capital of the Muslim Ummah at the time, of the Muslim Khalifa at the time, Damascus. Why? Why do this? Can anyone share reasons as to why would the Khalifa do this? Yes. Why?
Well, first of all, Tariq ibn Ziyad and Musa ibn Nusayr, both they become famous, and he was afraid he was going to lose the hold of the Dawla al-Umayyah.
Jazakallah khair. That's a very interesting reason. The brother said that the Khalifa was worried that they would become famous, too famous, and gain so much support that they would perhaps no longer need the caliphate, no longer be a part of it. But that's not actually true. That's not why the Khalifa ordered them to come back. This reason will come later on, inshallah. And it will be a reason for other things. But not with Al-Walid ibn Abd al-Malik. Al-Walid ibn Abd al-Malik ordered them to come back for different reasons. And I just want you to venture out, inshallah, as to why would the Khalifa, if you were the Khalifa, and you saw your sergeants and your generals making so much success in Al-Andalus, why would you tell them to stop and come back to Damascus? Umar. Did he want the troops for another purpose? Jazakallah khair. Good guess. Any other guesses? Yes, Hafsa. So the Khalifa perhaps did not like what Musa ibn Nusayr and Tariq ibn Ziyad were doing and had a problem with it. Close. It wasn't that he didn't like what they were doing, it was that he was worried about it. And he actually was, he was worried that the enemy soldiers would, rebel against Tariq ibn Ziyad and Musa ibn Nusayr. He wanted Musa ibn Nusayr and Tariq ibn Ziyad to stop and to establish Al-Andalus. Because if you notice, and perhaps the map showed this, and we'll see another map that will show this as well, Al-Andalus is like a little extension of Europe. And it's separated from Europe somewhat with what is known as the Pyrenees. It's a series of mountains. And the Muslims crossed that mountain to a city called Andorra in France. And when the Khalifa found out that this happened, he asked them to stop. Stop at the Pyrenees. This shows us a few things. A, the Khalifa was in tune with what was happening. Musa ibn Nusayr actually was sending messages to the Khalifa telling him what was going on. And B, that the Khalifa cared about the Muslim army and about the Muslims and the establishment of Islam in the region. And so, he knew about the intentions of Musa. And he was like, come on, we can't reach Constantinople now. We don't have the ability to do that now. We need to relax, we need to build our army, we need to build our nation, we need to build the civilization in Al-Andalus, and then gradually take that step to Constantinople, inshallah. It was the long lost past dream of Uthman ibn Affan. It was also so far from military support that he was worried that if something happens, support will not come in time. And we'll see that this does actually happen. Support does not come in time to save the Muslim army because it's so far away. Musa, interestingly, got this message and he responded in a different way. The first messenger that came with this message, he actually kind of, convinced him to let him go. And so, Musa ibn Nusayr continued. So he got this message before he actually finished opening all of Al-Andalus. And remember, all of Al-Andalus was open except for the rock of Pelona. And Pelona is a city that later on, inshallah, in the series we'll find has a very major role, major impact, inshallah, on the Muslims in Spain. So he wanted to open all of Spain. Before he did that, before he reached the rock of Pelona, he convinced the messenger to just wait. He said, you know what, I'll listen to what the Khalifa is saying, but just give me respite, give me some time. And so he opens it all the way to the rock of Pelona. Then another messenger comes. And then Musa ibn Nusayr this time cannot postpone it. He fails actually to convince this messenger, who is much tougher and much more demanding that he adhere to the commands of the Khalifa. And so they returned to the Khalifa. Before we talk about the return to Damascus and what they did there, Tariq ibn Ziyad and Musa, let's talk about how old Musa ibn Nusayr was. He was 75 years old at the time. What we would consider a very, very old man. Yet, he leads this army. He rides on his horse. He doesn't stay in a palace behind and, tells his generals to go. He actually leads the army. He goes into the battlefield himself. He does this. And it just shows us the value of himma. Himma is a word I could not translate. It does not exist in the English vocabulary. It's a combination of zeal, power, bravery, strength, and determination. It's a combination of these words. I'll say them again. Zeal, strength, bravery, and determination. Can you combine those 4 words into one? That would be himma. Himma. And himma is something that he had even though he was 75. So we ask the question, where are the 75-year-olds today? They're retired, right? They've done what they could do. They feel they have nothing else to contribute to this world. Then I ask the question, where are the 25-year-olds of today? Are they even equal in their himma to this 75-year-old man? And I say 25 because it's the average kind of youth range age. 25 is when you finish university, you've matured, you're ready to embark on life. Where are they? Where are they? They're busy getting a job, getting a wife or a husband, getting children. That's what they're busy doing. Right? That's what most 25-year-olds do. They're busy in their career and in their lives. And that's all great. But what are you doing for the ummah? What are you contributing to Islam? Even the spare time that you have, are you giving that to Islam? What are you doing for da'wah? And I'm not asking you to give it 24/7, even though perhaps you should. But no, we're asking you to give 2 hours a week, 3 hours a week, 4 hours a week. How many hours a week are you giving for Islam? Not for your own self-development, but for the others, for the nation, for the community around you. And so, just a note on citizenship. In Canada, we talk about citizenship, being a true Canadian, right? And so, it is said that if you do not criticize the government, you're not a true Canadian. So criticizing the government is fine. In fact, citizenship has nothing to do with loyalty to the government. It does, however, have a lot to do with loyalty to the community. Logically, the community actually pays taxes. So any system that makes use of these taxes, the buses, the light rail, the schools, the universities, actually has been paid for by, not you, by your community. By your community. Because if you alleviate that, if you don't use the taxes to pay for our welfare, our social welfare, our health care, and all of that, if you alleviate all that, what happens to us? We become like our neighbors in the south, where everything is bought and nothing is without you paying for it. And so we really do owe our community, not just our Muslim community, but our Canadian community, A lot. Yes, sister.
I'd like to add something aspect of like Story of Al-Andalus system, calculated system humanity. That's the Muslim world with the German war. And he said in lifespan of a human being, it's usually from 70 to 80 years old. So when you make a graph of that lifespan, like how many years you spend sleeping, and how many years you spend watching TV, and how many years you go shopping, and how many years you talking on phone, and how many years you remember Allah. So that part is the smallest part of the graph, wherein we should, as a human being, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us all the graces in this earth, and we are supposed to remember Him, not remember Him only. We have to do something also for our fellow human being, because if you make one human being happy, or even if you save one human being, you save the whole humanity.
Jazakallah khair. Jazakallah khair. In fact, scholars actually say that we have been given the blessing of health, the blessing of mind, our limbs, our fingers, our intellect, our eyesight, our hearing, our skill sets, all by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So how are we thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for these skills? And they say that the only way to actually truly thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for these skills that you have, for these blessings that you have, is by using them, the utmost usage, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so, Musa's response was trying to delay, trying to wait. And then he was really upset for returning to Damascus. He was upset for these two reasons. A, his dream was postponed. And B, he did not open Pelona. And he understood that Pelona is a city that is in the north of Al-Andalus. And if you don't open it, you don't open all of Al-Andalus. It is separated from the rest of Al-Andalus through the rock of Pelona, which is a mountain. And so he wanted to open Pelona to at least complete Al-Andalus. But he was forced to return, and so he was upset for that. The question that we need to ask ourselves today is, what upsets us? Are we upset because, the brother so-and-so did not propose to me, or I did not get to marry the sister, she got married to someone else before I got married to her, or the love of my life no longer loves me anymore, or, yeah, we do, or maybe a bad grade. A bad grade upsets us a lot, right? Or maybe the professor doesn't teach us so well, and so we get so upset. What upsets us today? These are questions that we need to ask ourselves, and this is what upset Musa. Nothing else, only this. But he obeys, and he takes Tariq ibn Ziyad with him, and he goes to Amir al-Mu'mineen al-Walid ibn Abd al-Malik. And this proves, scholars say of history, that this proves that Tariq ibn Ziyad and Musa did not want to separate with Al-Andalus, because they could have, if they wanted to, right? They had 18,000 troops from all over the Muslim world. They had 9,000 troops remaining with Tariq ibn Ziyad, who were mostly Berber and some Arab. And so they had a large army. And they had also many of the Andalusians themselves that became part of the army, that became Muslim. And so they could have easily separated with Andalus and enjoyed the riches of Andalus on their own. But he did not want that. He didn't come for the land or for the money or for the status or for the position. He came to bring Islam to the hearts of people. And so it was easy for him to abandon his own dream and to go to Damascus and follow the commands of Amir al-Mu'mineen, taking Tariq ibn Ziyad with him. This is another map, and this is where the Muslims could not reach. And if you notice at the bottom of that ellipse right there, that circle there, it's an ellipse, you'll see the rock of Pelona. And Pelona is in that region there. So the Muslims were able to open all the way till there. And you notice it includes Andorra, a city that's beyond the Pyrenees mountain. They reached Damascus. And Al-Walid was on his deathbed. he was actually very sick, and it took them months to reach Damascus. They used to travel, not by plane like we do today, but they used to travel by sea and then, in a caravan. And it took them months to reach them. When they reached, they saw that Al-Walid ibn Abd al-Malik was on his deathbed. A few days later, he passed away. Sulaiman ibn Abd al-Malik became the new Khalifa. But he also believed in the decision not to go deeper into Europe. And he kept Musa and Tariq in Damascus. It is said that Sulaiman ibn Abd al-Malik, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive him, has many, many beautiful acts of worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he enabled conquests of many regions in the east. Many regions in the east were brought into the fold of Islam during the caliphate of Sulaiman ibn Abd al-Malik. But it is said that he was under the influence of a man known as Al-Yazid ibn al-Muhallab. And Al-Yazid ibn al-Muhallab is referred to in history as a man that seeks position. That seeks position. And so it is said that perhaps one of the reasons he kept Tariq and Musa in Damascus was that Sulaiman ibn Abd al-Malik was in fact jealous of the conquests that they made, and was in fact worried that they would take Al-Andalus to themselves, and wanted to assign Al-Andalus to someone that he knew and that only he trusted. Perhaps. Perhaps. Wallahu a'lam. They go for Hajj. Sulaiman ibn Abd al-Malik decides to go for Hajj, and Musa ibn Nusayr says, I will go with you. I will go with you to Hajj. And they go. And he makes this statement. He says, and it's there, he makes a dua. He says, Ya Allah, if you have more life written for me, if you have more life written for me, remember he's 75, enable me to return to jihad and pass away a martyr. Enable this to me, Ya Allah. And if not, then enable me to pass away in the Medina of the Prophet ﷺ. And so that is what happened. On their way back, he actually passed away there. He did not die a martyr, despite the many battles that he was in charge of. He actually died a normal death, and he was buried with the Sahaba. Tariq ibn Ziyad, it's unknown what actually happened to him. But there's a very interesting story, inshallah, that is perhaps one of legends that we'll talk about next time, inshallah, about Tariq ibn Ziyad. What happened to him? Where did he appear next? A very interesting story, inshallah, that we'll talk about next time, inshallah, Rabbil Alameen. Not sure if he passed away in Damascus or not, but some say he passed away around 102 Hijri, but they're not sure. Pelona was left unopened. Remember Pelona? Pelona was left unopened. And Pelona becomes a nucleus for the Christian rebellion that happens many years in the future. And it will lead to the fall. It will be one of the reasons, or one of the rooms, one of the loopholes that will cause the fall of Al-Andalus many years later. It was neglected by the Muslims at the time that became the rulers of Spain, of Al-Andalus at the time. They neglected Pelona. Before we talk about chapter 2, before we talk about the Muslims and the Muslim Al-Andalus, and how it was and how it became, let's ask ourselves a simple question. And the question is, what would you have done if you were in charge of Al-Andalus? What would you have done if you were in charge of Al-Andalus now that it's been open for the most part, it's peaceful, up to the Pyrenees, in the northeast, and all the way to the Atlantic in the west, up to the north, all the way to the Rock of Pelona? What would you have done with Al-Andalus? Yes? Educate everyone. Jazakallahu khair. Jazakallahu khair. Can anyone add to that? What else would you bring forth in addition to education? Yes, one. Stabilize it, make sure it's stable. Jazakallahu khair. What else? Yes. Form a central government. Jazakallahu khair. So have a political establishment, a government that can enforce the law and have laws that regulate the lives of people. What else? Yes. Jazakallahu khair. So establish Muslim families and build a society. interact with the society, teach them about Islam. What else?
Have a Muslim Amir, the last Amirs in Granada, they were just playing music all night and drinking wine. They had practically nothing to do with Islam anymore.
Jazakallahu khairan. So we'll talk about the corruption of the rulers of Al-Andalus next session, inshallah. This session was in the beginning of the opening of Al-Andalus. They were not that corrupt yet. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. So we'll talk about that in this next chapter, inshallah. After opening Al-Andalus, it was an unprecedented military miracle, right? 12,000 against 100,000, and then a larger army was just pushed away, and people stopped fighting. And so, after the era of opening, a new era starts, known as the era of governors. Ahdul Wulah. The era of Wulah. And it's continued, this era in history, for 42 years. The governor of Andalus is the viceroy of the caliph, right? Of the Khalifa. He is the representative of the Khalifa. And so, the first one was actually Abdul Aziz ibn Musa ibn Nusayr, the son of Musa ibn Nusayr. And nearly 20 governors in 22 governments took hold of Al-Andalus, and this definitely affected Al-Andalus negatively. But why did so many governments change? Why so many governments? What happened to these 20 people, 20 governors? And scholars of history say there are two reasons. A, during the first part, many of the governors were actually leading the armies in the jihad. They were given the green light by the Khalifa to actually continue into France. And our next chapter is titled Jihad in France. And so they were given that green light, and they weren't the type that would stay in the palace and drink and play with music. They actually led the armies, and they went out into the battlefield. They were one of the troops. And so many of them passed away, many of them were martyrs during these battles. During the second part of this era, unfortunately, governors were corrupt, and so they plotted against each other. They saw the seat of government as something that is very powerful, and they sought this power and this wealth, and they plotted against each other. And so these were the reasons why these 20 governments took hold of Al-Andalus in 42 years. So each one took around 2 years or so, some only a few months. The first governor, Abdul Aziz ibn Musa ibn Nusayr, we'll touch upon briefly, because you might read his story in some of the history books. Abdul Aziz ibn Musa ibn Nusayr is very much transgressed upon in history. And the Orientalist story goes as follows. Abdul Aziz ibn Musa ibn Nusayr became the governor of Al-Andalus, and he married the widow of Roderick. The widow of Roderick. He married her, and she did not become a Muslim. She continued to remain Catholic, and she, tried to convince him, and actually convinced him to wear a crown, which he considered, not something that is Islamic. It was made of gold, after all. It is said that she kept on pumping him up, making him feel king, to the extent that he built in the doorway something that would make people bow down when they come into his court. And so they would bow down to Abdul Aziz ibn Musa ibn Nusayr. And when they saw this happen, they thought that he became a Christian, and that he didn't become Muslim anymore, and that he was forcing people to bow to him. And so they rebelled, the Muslims rebelled against him and killed him. That's the Orientalist story. And it's horrible. It's a horrible story. Horrible story, but very convincing. You got to give them credit for, the very creative writers right there. But it's a horrible story. And like any story that you hear in the media, a very small percentage is actually true. The majority is false. Because they want to make it sensational. And they want to hit us in those leaders of Al-Andalus. And Abdul Aziz was one of the Fatihin, was one of the people that led the Mujahideen in Al-Andalus. So it's a horrible story. And so, what else? What is the true story? The true story actually is unknown. He was actually killed. But we don't know by whom or why. However, there's one story that circulates in Muslim history books that Sulaiman ibn Abd al-Malik did something that he regretted for the rest of his life. Sulaiman ibn Abd al-Malik is the Khalif at the time. And under the influence of Yazid ibn al-Muhallab, he felt that Abdul Aziz ibn Musa ibn Nusayr actually is abusing the power that he had in Al-Andalus. Not only that, he is considering himself equal to the Khalifa. And it is said that Sulaiman ibn Abd al-Malik sent for those that would kill Abdul Aziz ibn Musa ibn Nusayr, and that they would send back his head to the Khalifa. This is one story that is there. Allahu A'lam what the true story is, only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. But the fact on the ground is that he did die, he was killed. And then another governor actually ruled, and that governor was appointed by Sulaiman ibn Abd al-Malik. We will not touch upon all of the governors. There are 20 people. 20 governors that inshallah Rabbil Alameen you can read about in history books. And there are many history books about them. But we will touch upon a few, only a few, because we will deduce some lessons from those few inshallah. The time of jihad, there was two phases we said. The first era of governors was the era of greatness and jihad, and continued from 96 Hijri to 123 Hijri. And after that, 123 Hijri to 138 Hijri was the time of weakness and corruption. Today inshallah we'll only talk about the first phase. Next time we'll talk about the second inshallah. But we won't talk about the 20 governors, we'll talk about a few. One of them, well actually all of them, during this phase established government. Right? When you were placed in their shoes a few minutes ago, these were the suggestions that we came up with. Establish government, spread Islam. And people are destitute. Tariq Sudan says this. He says that people are destitute, meaning that they're extremely poor. They're not just poor, they're extremely poor. And he wasn't referring actually to poverty of wealth, or that they don't have food to eat, or that their clothes are perhaps old and torn and shaggy. He wasn't referring to that. He was saying people are poor in the sense that they are hungry in their souls. They hunger in their souls. And human beings all throughout history are like that. And there are two types of people. There are those that feed that hunger with the pomp and glitter of this world. And there are those that feed it with the Quran and with Islam and with love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the true fitrah, the true instinct is what follows the second. Majority became Muslim. Majority were original Andalusians. The majority were original Andalusians. There were some Berber and some Arabs. What did the Andalusians find in Islam? And they found the following. They found a very comprehensive way of life that calls for high morals. They found a consistent and regular rituals of worship. They found how to treat your brother, your friend, your neighbor, your kin. They found how to treat your enemy, your hostage. How to treat all of those around you. Islam brought mu'amalat. Not just mu'amalat, it brought ibadat. These are the two categories of fiqh. Right? Deen, mu'amalat, or deen, ibadat. Ibadat is rituals of worship and how to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how to deal with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the rituals of how to deal with each other. They saw the humbleness of the leaders. The leaders were not arrogant and proud. They saw legislation that covers all aspects of life. This was new to them. They were lawless. And the nobles used to have their soldiers that would steal from them. Remember, I mentioned last time, Robin Hood? Very famous story. Everyone knows Robin Hood. Robin Hood would steal from the poor to give to the rich. Why? Because the rich were stealing from the poor. The rich were stealing from the poor. They were raising the taxes, they were calling it taxes, but they were to steal from the peasants and all the poor, and they would become richer and richer. Right? We all know the Sheriff of Nottingham? Yes. And so, Islam removed social classes and everyone became equal. We talked about this. Justice and fairness was spread. A question that needs to be posed, and some actually consider it to be true, is that the West, where we live in today, is much more Islamic than Muslim majority countries. Why so? Why so? I mean, if you look around, fornication is okay, drugs is okay, alcohol is okay, everything's okay. And that's horrible. But there's so much good that this society offers. And that is in the form of justice and fairness that allows for peace to prosper, that allows for Islam to prosper. And we see this evident in the numerous converts that return to Islam. Mosques. The first mosque in Al-Andalus was built in Zaragoza, or in Arabic, Zarqoza. And we'll see that in the map, inshallah. Where was the first mosque? Scholars say that mosque is not just a mosque where you pray like it is today. It is actually not just a temple where you worship. It is a community center. It's a parliament. It's a place where you meet and gather and deliberate and talk about matters and issues and hold discussions. It is a court where rules of law are implemented and talked about. It is a school. This is what scholars say about the mosque. And this is how we should maintain our mosques today. The Muslims used to buy churches and convert it into mosques. And no church was converted by force. No church was ever converted by force. It would be purchased at a much higher price than its actual value would be paid, and then it would be converted to a mosque. Compare this to the Inquisitions, which we'll talk about in the last few sessions of the series, inshallah. Let's see where the first mosque was built. Zaragoza, right there. See that red dot there? That's where the first mosque in Al-Andalus was built. They established a civilization, and we'll talk about it next time, inshallah. A civilization full of transportation means, full of inventions and manufacturing of ships, etc., etc. Next time, inshallah, next session, we'll show examples of the Muslim contribution to civilization and to science in Spain, inshallah. The non-Muslims would learn Arabic. It was the language of the time, the language of science. Compare that to today, where English is the language of science, where it's considered prestigious for a Muslim to learn English and to talk it well, and to speak it and to write it. Compare that to today. Cordoba became the capital. Toledo was too close to the north. This was one of the rulers, one of the governors, perhaps the 8th governor at the time. And this is the next chapter, Jihad in France. As-Samh ibn Malik al-Khawlani. Al-Khawlani is this man. He was the governor for Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz was the Khalifa after Sulaiman ibn Abdul Malik. And he appointed this man, As-Samh ibn Malik al-Khawlani. And he did something enormous. Over a period of 2 years, during the Khilafah of Umar, he actually spread prosperity in the land, in Al-Andalus. And Umar ibn Abdul Aziz is known for that. He's known as Khamis al-Khulafa al-Rashidin, the 5th righteous caliph. Andorra was the only Muslim city in France, and he was opened by Musa ibn Nusayr, and As-Samh opened other cities, the whole province of Septimania. Due to the shortage of time, I could not get a map for it, but inshallah next time I'll show you Septimania, inshallah. One of the most famous resorts in the world today, a sea resort. Right now it's a sea resort. People go to lie on the beach today. It was open to Muslims, and it was made a Muslim city. They ruled it for years in accordance to Islamic principles. As-Samh passed away on the day of Arafah in one of the battles, just to show you how the rulers and the governors would pass away as martyrs in Islam. Another is Ambisa ibn Sahim, and he ruled and he reached with his army until Sens. And it was nearly 70% of the south of France was all open to Muslims. He was also martyred. But after his martyrdom, things changed. A man known as Al-Haytham al-Kulabi, he was tribal. He was Arab, and he was from a tribe known as Al-Qaysiyya. He was very much prejudiced against anyone that was not from Al-Qaysiyya. Discriminated against non-Arabs and Arabs that were not from his tribe. But he found a fierce force facing him. A fierce force. The brothers in Islam that do not accept discrimination. These brothers are the Berbers. They fought and rebelled against Al-Haytham al-Kulabi. He lost his governorship easily to Abdurrahman al-Ghafiqi. Abdurrahman al-Ghafiqi is a very important man. And inshallah we will end with his governorship, with a battle that he fought in France, and with his martyrdom, inshallah. He united the Muslims under one banner, the banner of Islam. He told the Berbers and the Arabs and the Qaysiyin to forget all these differences. There's no place, no room for tribalism in Islam. No room for it. He returned the true spirit of Islam. They united all of them. The one that united the same force, the same group of brothers in Islam that came and crossed to Al-Andalus to begin with many years before. And they reached many cities in France. They opened Arles and Bordeaux, Toulouse and Tours. They reached Poitiers. And that is the city where the battle happens. Where the battle happens. It is 100 kilometers away from Paris. And it is 500 kilometers away from Qurtuba. And Orientalists and scholars of Western history would say that if Islam had won, if the Muslims had won in that battle, the Quran would have been taught today in Oxford. And all of Britain would have been Muslim. And a majority of Europe would have been Muslim. This is what the scholars of history say. Western scholars of history say. And of course they say it, saying, the meaning of which is, thank God that didn't happen. But they don't know what loss they have lost. Yes, House. So we'll see the maps inshallah, but north of Al-Andalus is actually a sea, and then there's Britain. The city, yes, they could not open that area. Yes, you're right. Pelona was not open yet. They went all the way to France, crossed the Pyrenees, but they didn't cross that rock. They actually, and this is perhaps in hindsight, a mistake, but they actually thought of it as a trivial city. It wasn't a built port, it was just a city on the sea called Pelona, and it was behind a mountain known as the Rocks of Pelona, and so it only had a few non-Muslims living there, and they didn't think it was significant. Its significance shows hundreds of years later, inshallah, and we'll touch upon that in the series, inshallah. Poitiers was the battle, known as the battle, in Arabic, Balat al-Shuhada. Balat al-Shuhada. And we'll touch upon what does Balat al-Shuhada mean and why was it named that way. What happened in that battle, a decisive battle, where the Muslim army actually lost. They camped in an area called Al-Balat. It was a courtyard of an abandoned castle. They prepared their soldiers to meet the enemy army. They had an army of 50,000. And they were facing against Charles Martel of France. And we'll touch upon who Charles Martel is next time, inshallah. Today we'll just mention him. And so, they had negative aspects in their army. In the Muslim army, there were many negative aspects, and this was one of them. The spoils of war. They had lots of wealth with them. They were very rich. They opened many cities before reaching Poitiers. They did the mistake of Uqba ibn Nafi', and they opened many cities. But the difference is that, in addition to opening the cities, they actually accumulated lots of wealth with them. Collected many riches. And fitna is in wealth as well. It is a tribulation. The Quran says, وَنَبْلُوكُمْ بِالشَّرِّ وَالْخَيْرِ fitna. And we test you with evil. Understandable, evil is a fitna. It's a tribulation. But even goodness, even wealth, even prosperity is a fitna, is a tribulation. And they had that tribulation. They faced it. And they succumbed to it. It actually skewed their vision. And their idea was to return to Al-Andalus with these riches. They said enough is enough. Abdurrahman al-Ghafiqi, their leader, said something very similar to what Rabi'i ibn Amir said. And we mentioned what Rabi'i ibn Amir said last time. He said, we did not come for this. We came to bring people into the folds of Islam. To free them. To allow them to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Very similar to what Rabi'i ibn Amir said to Rustam, the king of the army of Persia. Racism. And so when they have wealth, they look for what their brother has. And they started to say, I'm Arab. I'm more deserving of this wealth. I am from the people that originally brought Islam. I am from the people that know and are of the language of the Quran. We are more deserving to have more wealth. Our share should be more than that of the non-Arabs. And the Berbers said, well, our army is what brought Islam to Andalus to begin with. We are more deserving. So racism was planted in their hearts. They forgot that the openers of Al-Andalus were both Arab and non-Arab, and they didn't matter, they didn't care about these differences. What bonded them, what combined them, was Islam. They forgot this. Another was arrogance. They actually had the largest army ever to be made in Al-Andalus. 50,000 troopers. They were arrogant. They said, we have a large army now. We're not going to lose this battle. Where in the Quran was something like this mentioned? In?
The two battles. One is Hunayn.
Jazakallahu khair.
Yes.
And that's the example I have here.
Yeah.
I have the battle of Hunayn as the example here, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the believer, and on the day of Hunayn, behold, your great numbers elated you. The Muslims were happy and elated that they had such a large number. But that large number did not avail them. لَمْ تُغْنِي عَنْكُمْ شَيْئًا. What about taking the means? I mean, what about the fruit of efforts? Intention isn't everything, right? Our efforts are also something that we put in, and so we need to take the fruit of that effort. That's true. But it is actually the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that what is done in His name has to be pure for it to be successful. In other words, if you do something not for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not for the intention of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for worldly gains, you might be successful according to what you do. But if you do it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and with that intention, and in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it has to be pure for it to be successful. This is one of the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one of the means and ways and rules of life that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordained for us. No change will happen except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's way. One example I thought I would highlight is terrorism. You may choose to call it something else. And definitely I'm not talking about honest and the right for people to defend themselves. Because unfortunately that is also labeled terrorism by many. But people have the right to defend themselves. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the killing of innocent lives. Innocent people that have no say in anything. That have no crime but to be non-Muslim or to be from the opposite camp. That is true terrorism. And that will never be successful. For it transgresses against the rules of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and is disobeying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hence, you will never find terrorism successful, no matter what they do. Unfortunately, it's a step that is taken by the desperate, and it's a step that will never lead to success, if they only knew. Despite, and I know this slide is full, but it's actually a verse from the Quran that I thought I'd share with you. Despite having strong righteous leader, yet elements of failure and loss were prevalent in the army. And leadership is not everything. The workers must have true spirit. They must protect themselves. They must have a heart of steel. That's steel, not steal the verb. It should be E-E-L. They must protect themselves. They must have true companionship amongst themselves. Where is this from? It's from the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and keep yourself patient, because that's what it requires. It requires patience. Patience against the differences. Yes, I'm Arab, you're Berber, we're different. We have to be patient for that. Patience against tribulations of wealth. Yes, there's so much wealth out there, we should be patient for it. We should not aim for it. We should be patient against this fitna. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, don't seek the pomp and glitter of this world, but seek the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the reward of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A small note on the enemy army, Charles Martel, we'll talk about it in detail next time, was 400,000 fighters. And this number shook the hearts of the believers. Because the believers did not rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala anymore. The previous believers were 12,000 against 100,000. But they relied on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They didn't care. Because they trusted Allah. They believed that they would put their best efforts and they would purify themselves, purify their souls, purify their intentions, and they are bound to get rewarded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Unfortunately, this camp did not. They actually were proud of their numbers, and when they saw a much larger number coming, it shook them. The battle of Balat al-Shuhada was 10 continuous days in Ramadan. Now at the beginning the Muslims were actually winning. But then something happened, very interesting. And this reminds us of Uhud. Very interestingly, the Christians realized that the Muslims have wealth, and so they circled around and started to get the wealth. And the Muslims that were eager to protect the wealth left their posts, left their positions, and went to protect the wealth against the Christians. So wealth became their number one priority. That is what I would call a skewed vision. And Adam agrees. Their skewed vision, Adam is my son, is that it took them away from what is true. And they hesitated, the Muslims hesitated and shook. And they hurried to protect the riches that was being stolen. And this caused a divide. And the Muslim armies lost and retreated. Yet, Christian history books would tell you that the armies were so victorious that they eradicated all of the Muslims. And that the Muslims that died were 350k. Even though Muslim sources say that the army was only 50k, not 350. And so, but another proof that the army was not so victorious was the fact that they retreated, but they were not chased by the winning army that had 400,000 troopers. Did not chase them into Al-Andalus. They stopped. And so that tells you that they actually fought fiercely, and their retreat was not a horrible retreat. Yet, it is said that they lost many shuhada. Hence, the courtyard, meaning of Balat is courtyard. It was named the courtyard of the shuhada, the courtyard of martyrs. Many martyrs. And this is the saying that we mentioned earlier. They say that if they had lost that battle, the battle of Balat al-Shuhada, Islam would have entered Europe. And the Quran in Arabic would have been taught in Oxford today. It is truly a loss for humanity that this did not happen. Right? Right? Yes. You have to believe in that. Because the enemies of Islam will plant the opposite in you. They will plant the opposite in you. And if you do not confidently say that it is a loss for humanity, that the Quran is not taught in Oxford, and that Islam is not spread in Europe, it's a loss for all of humanity. If you do not say this confidently, strongly, with strength, without hesitating, without stuttering, if you don't say that, if you don't believe it in your heart, then you've lost the battle, my brother or sister. Balat al-Shuhada reflects some verses from the Quran, Surah Fatir, where indeed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is true. Do not allow the pomp and glitter of this world to deceive you and delude you. This is from verse 5 in Surah Fatir. The Prophet ﷺ has said a very interesting hadith, and actually, I never heard this hadith before, even though it's in Bukhari and Muslim. I've heard similar, but not this one specifically. Where he says, by Allah, I do not fear poverty for you. I do not fear poverty for you. But I fear that the world would extend its arms to you, extend its hands to you, that you become very rich, and that you would compete for it, for those riches, and that it would destroy you, just as it had destroyed the people before you. Sadaqa Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Racism and tribalism. Arabs and Berbers. The French witnessed this. And they kept it in their history. Dr. Raghib al-Sajjani likes to say that. He says that they kept this in their history. That the French and the Berbers and the Arabs are sensitive. Let's use that. And they have. France colonized Algiers from 1830 to 1960. That's more than 100 years. And they used it to their best of capacity. When the liberation movement started in 1920 in Algiers, in Algiers, they divided and conquered. They came and said to the Berbers, you are from an Aryan race. You are white, just like us. But the Arabs are brown. Forget them. They're foreigners. They're invaders. And so, they intensified teaching French, not to all of Algiers, but to the regions where the Berbers were living and located. And they prevented Arabic to be taught there. And they also did other things. They gave them the Latin letters to write their language. And the Berberi language was not actually written at the time. And so they were writing it in Latin letters, not in Arabic letters. And they wanted to remove Arabic completely. Until this day, there are forces that support these efforts in Algiers. Till this day, maintaining tribalism and racism in Algiers, ramifications of which are felt till this day. And if you search Google News, for example, for Algiers, you will find news of tribal feuds that happen between Arabs and non-Arabs. Till this day. However, No matter what they did, they could not remove Islam from the hearts of the Berber. They couldn't do that. They were not successful. But Allah Alam, perhaps if they had stayed in Al-Jazair, they would have done much more harm, much more damage. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala liberated Al-Jazair from the colonizing French. This is my last slide. Some questions, inshallah, that we'll try to answer during the coming sessions. The sun of the Muslims started to set after this battle. They started to lose strength. Who is Abdurrahman al-Dakhil? And what happened to the era of governors later on? And how did it contribute to the fall of the Khilafah al-Umayyah, the Umayyad Caliphate? How did this shift happen? Inshallah Rabbil Alameen, these are questions that we'll answer next time. Jazakumullah khair for your patience. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you and accept your efforts. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم استغفروه إني داعٍ آمين. اللهم آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم اغفر لنا خطايانا. اللهم اغفر لنا خطايانا. اللهم نفعنا بما علمتنا. آمين رب العالمين. جزاكم الله خير. السلام عليكم.